and welcome to Choices Global, a production of First Assembly of God, Wortmanville, Georgetown, Guyana. On this program, we curate and cultivate conversations pertinent to nation building. Our topic today will examine the attributes of a leader in times of change, conflict, or polarization. We have an awesome panel today, and they include Gavin Walker, a pastor of a thriving church in Columbus, Ohio, USA, and an unemployment insurance consultant who is involved in several community projects in his area. We have Marissa Messiah, an HR specialist and youth advocate, as well as a former commissioner for Rights of the Child Commission. Joelle Lee is our marketing manager in the private sector with an inordinate passion for national development and influential leadership. Limar is a UWI law graduate and Caribbean personality, and I consider him our youth delegate. We also have Mr. Kurt Corbin, a security project management and administration professional residing in Geneva, Switzerland, with yours truly, Siobhan Corbin, your moderator for this segment. Today, as we examine leadership in times of change, conflict, and polarization, we have an opportunity to use Rehoboam as our protagonist, and the account is found in First Kings chapter 12. And yes, we are using kingdom principles so that we could bring a different brand of leadership to the world, to the nations, and to our communities. Now, as we examine the account in First Kings panelists, I will start with you, Pastor Gavin, as we examine change. But I want to posit that out of a Harvard article read recently on business and executive leaders, they spoke about an old book talking about the first 90 days in leadership and challenging us to now start to contemplate the first 90 hours in leadership, given the pace at which the world is now moving. And so, some of the examples given in that article is that a leader in the first 90 hours, rather, should first of all be mindful of people who line up outside of your executive suite to give you advice. You should rather be looking for those persons who are busy getting the job done because they do not have time to come lining up. The other thing they talk about is being careful to not speak too soon. Don't accept speaking assignments because you've not yet learned the lay of the land. And finally, it does advise that we find good counsel, both experienced and new blood, so that you can craft the vision that you desire for your company and I dare say ministry or country. So, with that, Pastor Gavin, I really want to challenge you to tell us what are some of the attributes a leader should contemplate when they are entering into a position where there's either change, conflict, or polarization.
Very much, Siobhan, for that wonderful introduction. And it's a wonderful opportunity to be with you on Global Choices. Hello to all our viewing listeners. It's a beautiful opportunity to be here with you. Now, as you are aware, that I am in Columbus, Ohio, and I took over a ministry from someone who had left, and leadership is so very important. And when you begin leadership, I think one of the first thing you need to do is listen. Don't rush in with the intention of making changes right away, because that in itself can bring polarization. One of the first things you need to do is listen to those who are there, who've been there for a while, and get advice and good counsel from them. Now, when I took over the ministry, or let me step back a little. Before I took over the ministry, I met the person who was there before me, and he came at a time when the church was in divided. And one of the first thing he did was he wanted to make change by changing the name of the ministry. And so he did something like what Rehoboam did. He, you know, persons he listen to the advice of others. And um, majority of the people were saying, don't change the name. A few persons said, change the name. And the persons who said change the name were younger folks. Persons who said don't change the name was older folks. And so there was a situation where a decision had to be made. And of course, like Rehoboam, he listened to the younger folks. And that brought a whole lot of problems. That almost crippled his ministry from the very beginning. And so I learned from that. It is very, very important to listen to people around you. And all the folks give sound advice. It can either shut down the ministry, it can either bring an end to what you're doing, or it can advance you or propel you forward. So I want to encourage you. One of the qualities in avoiding polarization, or one of the qualities for leadership, seeking good advice, one, and listening. Listening is very, very important. Especially listen to those who've been there before you. Now, the name may not seem as a significant thing, but for people who've been there for a while, people who've been there for a while, were part of the ministry, and the name meant something to them. And so, listening to good advice, even though it may not seem, good in your ears, but it's worthwhile listening to those people around you.
Wow. I think, Gavin, this is very insightful. And I think I will ask Marissa and Kurt to prepare as we contemplate change and hearing Gavin speaking about listening. I think that sometimes we struggle as leaders to determine should it be listening to the older, mature persons or the younger ones. And I dare say there's a place for both. I think the matured persons in your organization, in your country, in your government, I find them as being the persons who staff your foundation, who keep you firm when sailing. And then you have the younger generation who comes with fresh ideas and gives more blood to the leadership so that we can take and propel our vision forward. So, Kurt and Marissa, I want to challenge you in a country, in a ministry, or in a business. Where do we find mentors? If I'm a minister of government or a president, where do I find mentors? Where do I find advisors? Because we might assume people know where to find this, but sometimes we need to share about this. Rissa and then Kurt.
I like how you posed the question because it made me think, where do you find these advisors? But then I, in experience, I would say it's not so much where you find the mentors and advisors, because I'm going to frame it this way. You just come to power and you now have an office. You're a minister of something. Your office is going to be inundated with everyone. People come to you, good, bad. Everybody wants to give advice. Everybody wants to um, give support. People want to guide you, as to what your policy should be, if you should make changes. The way that you distinguish and sift through the noise, I believe, is discernment. You cannot escape that fact. I think you go into any office, public office, governance. You go into it with your cadre of close friends or your cadre of advisors. However, I believe that when you get in there and you're on the ground, I think that you will need discernment to be able to determine what advice should I take. And discernment is separate from ego. And I think you have to check your ego, because sometimes in terms of your process of discerning who or what direction to go in and who to listen to may not necessarily be the persons you are looking at to be able to give the right advice. So young people will may want to listen to younger persons, or older persons may want to be hip and think that, I need to get young people on board, so let me pull in the young people and try to do something different. And so the only distinction there is discernment, I believe. Kurt?
Thank you, Marissa. You're not wrong. You have to have discernment, or you have to work with discernment in any office. However, I want to go back a little bit more. You are a leader. Your first intention, you must understand why you accepted this leadership position. That's the first thing. Are your intentions good? Are your intentions aligned with helping and not dominating and not being authoritative? So once you understand yourself, the next thing you're going to look for, as the question was posited by the moderator, who are my advisors? Firstly, they must be knowledgeable. They must be men and women of integrity. They must also know themselves, and they must also be willing to serve. Service. So those are the men and women, or those are the people we'll be looking for. First, you understand yourself. I am a leader. I have this position. I was appointed. I was elected. I was placed there. How are you going to lead? Who will my advisors be? Siobhan spoke about the 90 days or 90 hours. I like that. In Rehoboam's case, he was asked a question, and he asked for 3 days as well, for 3 days to think and make a decision. Amazing, isn't it? And Harvard is doing the same study. It is right here in our manual for living. He asked for 3 days, and then he went to two differing advisors, as Gavin mentioned earlier. And it comes back to my question: who are your advisors? What are they advising you? Is their heart, or are their hearts intent on service? Clearly, in this case, it doesn't mean it will be in all the cases. Clearly, in this case, the young advisors for Rehoboam, their heart was not intent on service. Their advice was pressure the people more, give them more. What kind of advice is that? I am a young leader, now asked to make a decision. The older folks advised me to ease it because it was already too much. And the young leaders told me, no, give them more. And then I come back to my first question: who are you as a leader? You see the questions I asked at the beginning and how they come back in? You have to know who you are first before you can even choose who your advisors are. Once you understand these principles, Siobhan, it will make your job much easier. Not easy, but much easier.
I want to add, from the perspective of a young person on this topic. You know, I I, I love the observations that my colleagues would have already made, and I love the point that Chevron started with the importance of 90 days. I'm going to use that as my point because if we look back at this whole COVID situation, while it was brewing for days, longer than 90 hours, really and truly the entirety of the world changed in an hour span because it was like a 2 day. I could remember I was over in Trinidad studying, and it was one Thursday. Some we were closing our airport, and you know, basically my life went from an in-person college student to about 2 years, just over 90 days, just over 90 hours period. Sorry, but why I mentioned COVID-19, um, I had the privilege of working with Dr. Messiah, and I watched how he utilized the council to really and truly deal with this whole and navigate COVID-19 and his ministry. Because what he saw the perfect time for the youth their skills, and so church had to be done online. And one of the things that he did, he looked at the young people around him, and guys like Robert and Anthony and others, um, they were given the opportunity to express themselves. Now, why is that important? I'm a firm believer of purpose being listed in a multitude of counselor that was taken from Proverbs. Sure. And something that I often see is there's this twofold perspective. I oftentimes see young people being unduly criticized for not wanting to take counsel. We can see it a lot all over the place. But there's also, on the flip side, a responsibility from folks to really and truly not be intimidated by the young people and create an environment for a relationship that is mutually beneficial to both generations. Because I know of a lot of young people that have been crying out for leadership positions within our community, and many of them for elections. And I look at it and I see sometimes more days, whether it be for partisan politics or what's not. But we oftentimes cry out, and while we see young people presenting themselves for these opportunities, they're oftentimes shunned. So responsibility on the older generation. So not only just criticize or point out the flaws of the young people, but get them in and guide them accordingly so that they can really take up the mantle and not go outside or some other way and be led down the wrong path.
So I think this is good. I hear from you, Limar and Kurt, that you are now centering on a question that I have around who are we called to serve. I think we started off looking at change. We then shifted now to counsel. Who is your counsel? And I think now we need to examine who are we called to serve. And I think in the case of Limar, when you talked of that example of a faith-based organization, First Assembly of God, using or leveraging the knowledge and expertise of their young people, it was to take the gospel to the people they were serving as an organization, but using the counsel of the youth. I think we heard that in Gavin's example of going to a new church, and he was focused on whom he had to serve rather than, the whole notion of name changing and all of these other things that you will have to grapple with. So I want to touch this now to Joel and then back to Gavin. How does a leader stay focused on whom they're serving rather than their leadership journey alone? How do we get closer to the people, in government, in ministry, in an organization? And I bring this because I am fascinated always by the Swiss governance system, where every decision is made by the collective vote of the people. So if they want to construct a bridge over Lake Geneva, it is called to a vote, and if the people are more inclined to protect the environment, they do not want the fumes of the cars exhausting over their pristine lake. And so their governance is centered on the people, and they also have a rotational presidency. So it means one person does not serve for 5 years, but I think rather 2 years, and then they rotate over seven different presidents, for want of a better word. So tell me, Joel, how do you see leaders? What can they do? What is needed for them to take their leadership to the people? Because it's the people we're serving and solutions that we should be giving to them. Joel and then Gavin.
Well, the interesting thing about that is Rehoboam was called to lead both young and old. So having an understanding of who you're serving is important because, like you rightly said earlier, Siobhan, as relates to the older folks, having an understanding of what was there before, foundational understanding. So there's a need for the older folks within that regard, and the youth also. Their role is more or less for you to expand and gain more territory. So you need to understand specifically, okay, if this is a decision based upon us gaining more territory in terms of we push the vision forward, all right, the young people have an understanding of what's happening on the ground based on how things relate to their generation. So in terms of that, yes, you need to take that counsel. Rehoboam approached both. He started out on the right footing. He approached the younger folks, he approached the older folks, and he was given their advice. But he sided with something that really and truly, as a leader, you should not have done, because the older folks are saying, okay, your dad did this, we went with it, but we had some issues with it. So he needed to say, okay, well, he should have asked another question. So, what can we do to make this better for the people? But he took the advice of the younger people. And in some cases, unfortunately, for younger leaders, sometimes, you want to stamp your name on it, so to speak. Joel did this. And it leads us into in a direction where we end up making more trouble. And that's really not the intention.
Gavin, how do we take it to the people that we serve?
Well, I think you have to remain focused on what is your purpose, why you are there. You are there to serve the people, and you cannot lose vision of that. And then you have to, in my situation as pastor, it's twofold, because I have to listen to the people, and I also have to listen to the direction God is leading. And so I have to learn to follow the instructions of what God has impressed in my heart and in my spirit. And even though, you know, pulling people together and letting them understand, here, this is the direction we're going, this is the direction God is leading, selling them the vision and causing them to understand where we're going and why we're going in this direction will muster or build person to buy into what you're doing. And once you convey that to the people, once you convey that to those you are serving, I think, and they're able to understand and understand what you're doing, where you're going, I think you will have enough support, and people will do like what they did to Moses, lift up his hands. Um, Serving is very important, and conveying what you're doing is very important.
Wow. Well, I think I want to shift gears now. I think we started off contemplating change, contemplating conflict, contemplating polarization. And I, for example, work in global health. And we have a challenge. I think we spoke of leadership dilemmas in a previous segment. And so I hope you viewers will go, and if you missed that segment, you will capture that one and come back to this. But we speak about leadership dilemmas in the world, and this is why we are fascinated with leadership and how kingdom principles can come to bear. And I want to talk about what we call in global health as vaccine apartheid. You know, the pandemic allowed us to see that even though we were meant to walk together as one global community to end the pandemic, we had countries sequestering, sufficient medication for their own country and populace at the expense of others. Yet, everyone around the world were contemplating or dealing with death. Now we have an opportunity to prepare for other pandemics, and yet we have sometimes the world's rich still holding on to the manufacturing and relevant copyrights to medicine and medication. And so I want to challenge us again as we bring biblical principles to bear that I want to posit, there is a space for our faith, there is a space for our spirituality, And as Marissa said at the beginning, there is a space for discernment that comes from a very deep place. And so, to all of the panelists, starting with Marissa, I want you to go back to a particular biblical protagonist that has developed or delivered a leadership solution in change or conflict. And I would want to start off by celebrating Nehemiah, and we can all take different elements. But what I found in the workplace is that persons who have a deep faith often come with solid solutions. I work in an organization where Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and many other religions coexist. There are prayer rooms in those organizations, and it is normal for me to walk past a meeting room and find my Muslim colleague on their mat praying at the required hour. And that has not caused us to operate in conflict in a team. I have colleagues wishing me happy Easter, and I also respect when a colleague is in this fasting period, their fasting period of Ramadan. So again, I want to signal that there's changes, conflicts, and yet we can find solutions that bring people together and use those biblical or kingdom principles that we are familiar with. And so I want to celebrate Nehemiah because when his city, the city of Jerusalem, was destroyed, he used his position in a diplomatic role, I'd want to say, and he was able to garner resources and take it back. But what I loved was that when the building was done, they were there praying and thanking the higher authority, our Lord Jesus, for providing the resources and bringing them together and to a state of completion or wholeness. And so, with that, Marissa, I want to challenge you and then Joel to share your examples in 2 minutes each.
Okay, thanks for putting me on the spot. I was reading about Joseph and Joseph's role as a leader, and he had a role as a follower, as a supporter, as an advisor to the king. I really enjoyed it because you are able to follow Joseph's arc in terms of his professional life. And then there was a moment when he was the head of the entire household. His master trusted him implicitly, and then the wife tried to say that he was assaulting him. And we know the Me Too movement is really big and a really good focus now. So he had a moment and was sent to jail. And in jail, you would think that he would, wonder, oh my God, what you said I'm a leader. How am I going to lead in jail? And this man was so driven by the vision that God put in his heart that he continued doing what he knew to do, which is lead. And so, even in that circumstance, he was a leader. And that ability that he had to be able to discern, decipher, interpret dreams, that ability, among all of his other abilities, was the thing that got him out of jail and made him an advisor to the president, well, the king. So I'm gonna say it doesn't matter what people may do to you. Your skill, your talent, your ability is something that God will never take back. And that is something that will see you through to the next level. And so, in terms of clarity of focus, he always maintained going back and being very clear about what it is he was supposed to do in that moment. He never gave bad advice. He always ensured that his people were protected. And in the final analysis, ended up saving not only his family, not only the king, but an entire nation of people through a famine. So that would be Joseph, would be my leader.
Well, I would say the tribe of Issachar, because they understood at
Mm.
times one of the critical things that any leader must understand where you are. you know,
Wow.
it's all well and good to have grandiose ideas and it's good to dream, but you need to also know where you are and the environment in which you're operating too. Because
Mm.
without that, there's many things, and like Neymar alluded to earlier, in the multitude of counsel, there's safety. If you don't know where you are, and what you're called to do, you can find yourself making a lot of mistakes because it's trial and error, and any effective leader has to first understand who he is, understand where he is, and where he's going. Those are the three basic questions you have to understand. You need to have a clear understanding of and be able to, because that will help you to now discern the advice that is coming to you in terms of those who are around you, those who have their own personal agendas, like we saw in the case of Rehoboam, and how to navigate through that. So I would say, like the people of Issachar, we need to understand the times.
Wow.
Limar?
For me, I'll go with David, popular figure. Simply put, he showed us that success does not mean perfection. He was human, he was flawed, he understands his limitations, and he will be remembered as a man after God's heart. So David is quite the we're human, we'll make mistakes, but always be humble enough to acknowledge them and seek the source of our strength and seek the source of our direction. Always go to God. Whether you're a political leader, a spiritual leader, whatever leader, you're flawed, but God will cover those flaws.
Kurt and then Gavin.
Thank you. I will go. I was going with Joseph, but I will go with the Lone Ranger ruler, Noah. Can you imagine in a generation you're building something where it shouldn't be built, where persons cannot see beyond. He's building an ark, a large boat on land. There's no port nearby, there's no waterway nearby. And he's building, and everyone is against him and calling him crazy. Can you imagine that? As a leader, Gavin mentioned about you have to know what the direction God is sending you, and you also have to understand, listen to the people as well, but you always follow God. This Lone Ranger leader, Noah, I'm amazed that he withstood all of this. And at the end of it all, we know the rest of that story. If you don't know that account, come and read my manual for living. You will know how it ended as well. How it ended as well.
Mm.
Gavin, the last word.
Joshua, Joshua, Moses, my servant, is dead. Had Joshua had a big shoes to fill, and probably he was intimidated. The Lord probably saw what Joshua was going through and how he was, uh, I guess, afraid. But he got some reassuring words from the Lord, and the Lord had to shake Joshua by saying, "Hey, wake up! Moses is dead. It's time for you to lead." And as leaders, sometimes we go through phases in our lives when we have to have a wake up call. And God can use anyone for that wake up call. And when He
Beautiful.
uses that one, I'm here to say, wake up. If not, you'll be in big trouble.
Wow. Wake up. I love it, Gavin. I love it. To our audience, you can see that we have had an awesome session today. I don't want it to end, but we started off contemplating leadership in times of change, in times of conflict, and in times of polarization. And I think that the panelists very nicely took us through the change, the counsel that is needed, and being grounded in understanding the people that you were called to serve. As a leader in global health and finance, there is one thing that keeps me grounded, and I heard Gavin say sometimes we can be afraid as leaders. And when that time comes around, I go to Malachi and I read the words of the Lord that declares that we should do justice, we should love mercy, and we should walk humbly with God. With that, I want to thank you, panelists, for such a lovely and lively discussion as we seek to create conversations that shape the destiny of our nations, of our communities, and our families. To you, our viewers, thank you for joining again. Thank you for your support. Please continue to subscribe and like on our YouTube channel. You can find us at faogw.org and on our YouTube channel, Choices Global. Join us again on the 14th of May at 5 p.m. for another engaging episode. I am Chevon Corbin, your moderator for today, encouraging you to remain safe and find the leader in you. This is Choices Global.